podcast.
Can you bear another Berlin story? Can you bear another Berlin story? If you've not listened to last week's episode, then you missed what is essentially part one of this episode, where I was talking about Berlin, and we'll get into that more later. I mentioned on the last episode that we played, or were supposed to at least, play in Berlin a couple of times on the Sarah Smith Euro tours back in the day. We had to cancel our first appearance there in 2017 because of illness. And it was 2018 when we went back. I thought it was 2019. In fact, it was 2018, but these things all blur together, you know. Like, they describe World War I and World War II as fundamentally one long, extended engagement. And so my experiences of 4 Euro tours with Sarah kind of turned into just one long tour of 4 years with intermissions, an extra long one in 2020. And so I forget sometimes what was when and when was what. But our second trip to Berlin was actually 2018. And I talked about playing this little club. We were supposed to play outside, but the weather was horrendous. And so we moved it inside and we rocked that joint. And I didn't tell you part 2 of that evening. I talked about playing that show and what a good time we had. And then I neglected to go into what happened after that show. And so I will read to you now from the second tour blog, the sequel to the November book, the unpublished sequel, from my entry, one of the entries about Berlin from that tour. So we were actually in Berlin a couple times that tour. And the first gig we were supposed to play, I think, was the first gig of the whole tour. And we got there and we were supposed to play outside in this park. And they had like a band shell set up. And it was just frigid. It was so cold. I think it was raining. And so they moved us into this little beer tent, this little beer garden. And it was kind of hilarious, actually, because it was not heated. So a few of us crowded into this little beer tent, and we just decided to do it acoustically. And so I played my box drum and damn near broke my hand that night, kids. Freezing to death, smashing my hand against a table. Anyways, we eventually did play that show inside, and here's my account of it, at least part of it, from the 2018 tour blog, which still exists for the moment on my website, john-huff.com, where you can also buy shirts. Last night was an early show, which presented the rare opportunity to dig a little deeper into Berlin. A bunch of the superfans, plus Sarah's friend Nellie, loaded us up for a trip downtown, where we got to see the Reichstag and the Brandenburg Gate. You know I'm a history person. You know how this stuff affects me. The Brandenburg Gate was the crossing between East and West Germany as a symbol of German unity. You walk those streets and you walk history. When you visit these sites, the stories become reality. You can picture things. You can feel things. You can watch Denny Gautier sprint like a madman across your field of vision with the police keeping a wary eye. We didn't get to spend long at the sites, but that's okay. You don't expect to get to see anything when you're on tour. So even those few minutes felt like a gift to me. Afterward, we met a bunch of people at a pizza joint for great food and still more laughter. Always the laughter. I think we're finally starting to get past the jet lag and feel normal and balanced and healthy again. Just in time for our return to the Reeperbahn. I'm not going to tell you any Reeperbahn stories today. Why am I still talking about Berlin? Well, I'm going, kids! I have made the decision. I have purchased all of the required tickets to go to Berlin and see Ghost on the Skeletor. And how friggin' exciting is that? I was revisiting this week episode 88 of this podcast. You got to go back a long way, like 3 years, over 3 years, to episode 88, which was The Boss and the Berlin Wall. And that's when I had the means, time, wherewithal to do histories. I was experimenting with histories in those days, mostly music stories. And I uncovered this amazing story of Bruce Springsteen playing a huge concert in East Berlin in 1988. That is not something that was done, and I'm not going to redo that whole history right here. You can go back to episode 88 and listen to it, and I'm going to tell you right now, it's a pretty damn good episode. If I do say so myself, that was a pretty freaking good episode. And I wanted to remember some of the stuff. Once I made the decision that I'm going back to Berlin, I wanted to recount in my mind just a little bit of that history. And I got to thinking about the Brandenburg Gate, which is probably the symbol of Berlin, this enormous set of pillars, columns, with the ornate statues on top. And it is a symbol, 100% a symbol of Berlin. And I can remember standing in front of the gate that night after the show we played. And yeah, it was dark. It was lit. I mean, it's a very public kind of touristy area. It was lit, but it was dark outside. And just in the distance, I could see Denny's Took just running like a madman around the area. And that is very much Denny Gautier on tour, man. We were with a bunch of friends. It was the rare opportunity to go and actually look at some stuff. We so rarely got that opportunity. Touring does not really afford that opportunity to you. You breeze into a city, you set up, you sound check, you play your gig, you breeze back out of that city again. It is not a holiday. It is not a holiday. And so it was really a treat to play a little bit of an early show and then have our fans and friends who are so generous just load us up and take us down there and let us look at some stuff. And I become instantly trapped in time. If you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know I am affected by history in very weird ways. And so I revisited that episode, which I think is just really good. I think it's a credible history. There was some slight inaccuracy in the blog post that I wrote where I said that the Brandenburg Gate was the passage between East and West. It wasn't really. Not when the Berlin Wall was up. The Brandenburg Gate was actually inside the east side of Berlin, and the wall completely cut it off from the west. Eventually, the wall came down in 1989, November 8th, I think, 9th, 8th. And in December, they had torn away enough wall to actually open up the Brandenburg Gate again. And what a happy day that was. And it became the symbol of German reunification. And it is all in its own just a fascinating story. And so I'm looking at news coverage going back in time to 1989 when the wall came down and just watching some of the news coverage, which is so affecting. It was what a moment it was because it was so unexpected. The wall had been up. A lot of people think the wall went up in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. It didn't. It went up in 1961. And it went up to stop the drain of people from East Germany into West Germany, because the West was a capitalist democracy in our style run by the Americans, British, French. The East was a Soviet-style communist state run by the Soviets. And people were allowed freely between 45 and 61, basically freely, to go across the border and into the West, and they would just go in and disappear. And they were doing so by the millions to escape Soviet-style living into the West. And that brain drain, fundamentally, it was a brain drain. It was young, educated people who had received their education for free from the communist government, because that's how communism is supposed to work. They were saying, thank you very much for that degree. I'll disappear now and go into the West where I can listen to the Beatles, you know? And so they erected the wall kind of overnight, the beginning stages of it, in 61. As a way, they said, in the East, they said, to stop fascists from the West from infiltrating the East. Truth is, they were stopping people from the East escaping to the West. So in 61, this thing went up. And then a whole generation of people lived in Berlin with the Berlin Wall completely surrounding West Berlin. Berlin was firmly within the Soviet zone of control of Germany that was established after World War II. But they partitioned Germany, they partitioned Berlin in the same way. So even though it was within the Soviet zone of control entirely, half of the city was split among the Western Allies. And a whole generation of people grew up with the wall as just a fact of life. Families were separated from each other, and on one side, there was communist life, Soviet life, and on the other side was a Western democratic life. And so it was for nearly 30 years, and then kind of overnight, it just came down. And if you want to hear the story of how that happened and why it happened, and the bewildering circumstances under which it happened, go back and listen to episode 88, The Boss and the Berlin Wall, because the boss, Bruce Springsteen, had just a little tug on one of the little threads that helped bring all of that down. Fascinating story, and I actually think I told it fairly well. So if you're one of those people who miss my history episodes, go back and listen to that one, because I listened to it and there was stuff in there that I'd forgotten. And so you look at the history of the Brandenburg Gate. I mean, you can see photos online of it behind the wall, and you can see photos of it. There's paintings of Napoleon. Napoleon's army marched right through the Brandenburg Gate. And on Hitler's 50th birthday party in 1939, the thing was draped in swastikas and all lit up. All of the columns lit up for the Führer's birthday, his Geburtstag. And it's just fascinating. And I can see all of that and then picture in my mind Denny Goche's toque running all through that area. And it's affecting to me, just like I said in the blog post. This stuff really hits me. And so when I was down there in 2018 and standing in front of the gate and looking at it and imagining Herr Hitler, and they had a huge military parade for him on his birthday, and I'm picturing troops marching through there, standing on the very ground. A Soviet flag flew for many years above the gate, the hammer and sickle, and it affects me very deeply, and I know more about it now than I knew about it then, and I'm going back there. And I intend to go visit the gate again. And imagine that Napoleon walked exactly where I'm standing, or Hitler, or imagining those columns with those swastikas draped over them. It's just staggering when you imagine history standing in those very spots. And I've had that peculiar experience in lots of different places. You visit the Vimy Memorial, for example, in France, just outside of Arras, and you can walk up the slope, and you can just imagine all of those soldiers fighting their way up the ridge. Or you go to the Newfoundland Memorial at Beaumont-Hamel, which is just around the corner, and you can stand in the trenches. And then if you use your imagination, you use your mind's eye, you can picture it as it was. And it's sobering and kind of terrifying. And I've been, stood outside the whiskey in Hollywood and imagined the people coming and going from that place. And so it is at the Brandenburg Gate and other places I've been that have historical significance, and it affects me. And I'm stoked about it. And it's just very, very interesting to me. I do a lot of retrospect these days. I'm supposed to be, on one spiritual hand, I'm supposed to be very in the present and in this moment, and I do try to be. And then, given the circumstances of my life and how much change is happening and how much change is coming and a new life that I'm stepping into, slowly but surely, I do a lot of futuring as well, But in the midst of all that, I do a lot of retrospecting, because when something so significant as a marriage ends, it's hard not to look back. And I can look out the window now of my little studio and see the backyard. I can picture us taking down the apple trees that used to be there. I can picture a whole menagerie of cats who used to be out in that yard. I can see stuff out there, and that's my own history. In a sense, this window is my own Brandenburg Gate, in a way. I can picture when the ice storm came and took down huge branches in the yard. I can see all of that stuff, and I do a lot of retrospecting these days. And I think it's a healthy part of moving forward. I think it's a healthy part of grieving. I think it's a healthy part of reconciling the phases of your life. And I think how strange it is to be saying that I'm going back to Berlin. Not that I'm going to Berlin. I'm going back to Berlin. If you had said to me 15 years ago in 2010, before this particular odyssey began, this odyssey in music, if you had said to me, hey, in 15 years, you're going back to Berlin, I'd be like, back to Berlin? Yeah, and you're going to see Ghost. And I would be like, the hell is Ghost? And why would any band apart from King's X be enough to take me to Berlin? And why am I going back to Berlin? What have I missed in the last 15 years? What coma have I been in the last 15 years? And to realize that I'm going back to Berlin because music took me there in the first place, and playing the drums. And this whole weird odyssey that happened over the past 15 years, for me, it's just fun and kind of mesmerizing to put myself back in 2010 and to find out that all of this stuff is going to happen. And then this other really weird wrinkle that says, oh, by the way, it's going to be your first adventure, your first real adventure as a single man. And that is bewildering. That is a profound and important thing. I find my separation is like a zipper slowly opening. Some people's separation is a sword right through your jacket. They come home from work and find all their stuff on the front yard and the door locks changed. And all of a sudden, like those people who woke up that morning in November of 1989 to realize that the Cold War was over and the wall was coming down, quite unexpectedly, some people, their relationship ends that way, quite unexpectedly. Now, there may have been, as there were in 1989, signs of an impending collapse, but the actual moment of it is like a thrust. It happens very quickly. And then you are suddenly on your own. And that's got to be incredibly disorienting, and it's not a surprise that some people go off the rails in those circumstances because too much change, overwhelming. And there are phases, I think, that you've got to go through with this, right? That's a tragic thing when it's just over, bang, like that. That's a violent kind of thing, psychically violent. And I think it's very, very difficult for people to deal with that. It's kind of like I talked about people who get famous overnight, viral sensations, who are just they haven't built the infrastructure. They haven't built what it takes to deal with the slings and arrows that follow that overnight success. Just not prepared for it. The attention, the spotlight, the criticism, it's way too much, and they pop. And so it is, I think, with a lot of people when a marriage or a relationship ends very suddenly. It's like they just can't deal. I've been lucky in that sense, that mine has been like the slow unzipping of a zipper. Little bits coming apart, kind of in steps and in phases. And I'm realizing that a solo trip is an important part of the unzipping. This is the first time in my life, really, that I have decided to do a thing, decided to go somewhere, decided to spend my money going to do a thing that's my interest in a place of curiosity to me on my own. I know I did the K Cruise a couple months ago, and that was kind of a trial run, I guess. I spent a little bit of time alone in New Orleans. I flew alone, whatever. But I was with Kay. right? That was a trip where I was with Kay for that whole week and we had a wonderful time together, and I miss her. In this case, it's me going solo, and this is a weird trial of freedom, a weird taste of freedom, and there is a flutter of excitement about it. I got to tell you, when you are in a marriage, you don't really do that, and it's interesting. Philip McKernan, who I've mentioned many, many times on this podcast, speaker, life coach, somebody who I follow and whose ideas and wisdom have been very, very foundational for me. He recommends that once a quarter, or at least 2 or 3 times a year, people separate from their spouse for a weekend or a few days and just go somewhere on their own and be alone and be with themselves and be with their thoughts and exercise that independence. Recalculate, recapture that sense of self. What happens is when you are in a partnership, particularly a long-term partnership, your sense of self can become a little bit subjugated. That's not a deliberate thing. It's not even a bad thing. It's just a function of being part of a partnership. But you can lose yourself a little bit in that. And you don't necessarily perhaps realize that until you're not in the partnership anymore. And then in some cases where it's been very abrupt, you maybe wake up one morning and your life falls apart for several months, but then probably green shoots appear. At a certain point, you achieve some stability and things level out a little bit. And then all of a sudden, this little blossom of possibility happens. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. I can do whatever I want now. Well, that's interesting, because I haven't been able to do that in a very long time. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a functional reality. You do stuff with your partner. You do stuff at least in consideration of your partner. And Philip McKernan's not saying shut out your partner. He's saying it's healthy and grounding to go spend a few days alone. Check in with yourself, right? It doesn't mean you lose contact with your family. And it's like, don't go and work, by the way. I mean, take a few days, go someplace by yourself, go eat dinner, go see stuff, go exercise your autonomy, your independence as an adult human being. And that is not to the detriment of your relationship. That is to the health of your relationship. You check back in with yourself, you feel this sense of freedom and autonomy, and then you come back into your relationship more grounded again, more in touch with yourself. And he recommends both spouses do that as a healthy way of being. And that always felt a little bit weird to me because that's not the way it's supposed to go, right? And then if you rock up on your spouse and say, hey, I'm going away for a few days, you stay here. You're probably going to get some looks, man. And I understand that, and I would have probably given those looks too. But one of the things that happens in a separation is you either have a new life thrust upon you in some cases, and that can be really, really turbulent and difficult. And a lot of people handle that very badly, and I understand why, because it's incredibly disorienting, and a world is shattered. A world is gone, and it's a crisis, and you begin to freak out. I have not had that experience, and I'm very lucky in that way, that our breakup is amicable, and that we have done this over the past 8 months now together, and it's been gentle, and that's cool. I haven't had to face that kind of, for the most part, I haven't had to face that kind of abrupt shock to the system. There have been shocks to the system, but I have had some stability and grounding, a place to live through the whole experience, and that's been cool. But then when you have that, the separating begins. Not just in a legal sense, but in an actual emotional, existential sense. You begin to separate. And traveling separately from each other is a big part of that. And so this trip of mine to Berlin to see Ghost is a big step. It's a big step. And I find it fun. Out of all of the Ghost dates in Europe that have been listed, and this has been on my radar for a long time, by the way. Like a year ago, I was thinking to myself, wouldn't it be fun to go to Europe to see Ghost? And it was always Ghost. interestingly enough. Now, they played Vienna on the last tour, and our good friend Angie went to that, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to go to Vienna and see Ghost. Couldn't do it. Couldn't make the finances work. And this was an idea in my head a long time ago. It would be friggin' cool to do that. And then circumstance happens. Isn't it weird? 15 years ago, me would be shocked to know, A, I'd never heard of Ghost. B, I'm going to Berlin, back to Berlin, to see this band called Ghost, and I have a history there. And it's just cool how history goes, and it's cool how life unfolds, You just don't quite know how things are going to go. And over the course of the past 15 years, I've experienced such radical change in my life circumstances, in my personal circumstances, the way I interact with the world, a ton of growing. And now here we are in this separation, and that would have been one of the things that 15 years ago, if you had said that part to me, would have been very shocking indeed. And to a certain extent, it still kind of is. But here we are. What is life asking of you? Life is asking me to forge a new existence, forge a new life. And going on a solo adventure someplace is really kind of an exciting thing to do. And I don't know what I'm going to do in Berlin, apart from see Ghost. I already got my ticket. Good to go. It is a no-phone show. Ghost is doing this now where your phone's not allowed. So when you get to the gig, they have a pouch that you got to put your phone in, and then they give you the pouch with the phone in it, and it's locked, and you can't unlock that sucker. They got to unlock it for you. And so it's a no phones thing. I can't take any photographs for you. Can't take any videos. And I think that's terrific, frankly, because I tried real hard, actually, over the past few years to just experience things, to not chronicle things, to not capture memories of things. Do you ever actually go back and watch the video you take at a show? You see these people who video the whole damn thing. And it's like you missed the show when it was happening. You're not going to watch it later. You and I both know that. I do like to take a couple of photographs as mementos, but more and more and more, I try to take fewer and fewer and fewer photos of things. I try to experience things. I try to make memories. And so the Ghost show in Berlin at Uber Arena is going to be that. And I think that's just going to be a really cool experience. By all accounts, this tour, which just kicked off a couple weeks ago, has been stunning. I mean, Ghost is, I've seen them twice. It's an incredible visual thing to look at. Like their stage is really, really cool. The costumes on every tour, mesmerizing, Papa, the whole thing. And the show's really funny, by the way. There's a lot of banter. There's a lot of kind of visual stuff going on. There's some silly stuff. A lot of jokes for a band that's supposed to be so satanic and evil. It's actually quite a lot of fun. And visually, it's stunning. And then the performance is just breathtaking. I mean, the players in this band are just so good. And the show they put together is stunning. I mean, to be playing at that level, it's absolutely staggering. And so, yeah, put your damn phone down and just experience people playing at the highest level and a show delivered at the highest level. And I'm stoked about that. I'm stoked about just being in that crowd and watching this show. And then doing it by yourself is weird, man. Traveling solo, it's a brand new thing for me, but I already feel like I'm going to really enjoy it. I like airports. I like going around seeing stuff, and it will be weird to be doing it solo, but that's life now. It's like you have a choice in any circumstances. I've said, as I've quoted recently on this podcast, your greatest power is the choice you have to choose your thought in any given moment. And so you can lament that I'm going to do this by myself and all the implications of that. It means I ain't got nobody. But sometimes you're your own best company, And so why not embrace it? And it's already got my wheels turning. It's like, well, where else can a fella go? A fella can go to Berlin to see Ghost. Where's the War on Drugs playing in their next tour? Where can we go and take a look at that, you know? And it's like you have this opportunity in any given moment, I guess, to embrace your circumstances. Sometimes those circumstances are going to be interesting and cool. Sometimes they're going to be utter crap. I'm in the lucky position right now where circumstances are kind of cool. And we're building a new life here. And that is like the Berlin Wall, I guess, going up one brick at a time. Maybe that's not the best comparison. Maybe it's not the best metaphor. But I plan to go down and stand at the gate again and try to picture that Soviet flag on top and try to picture those swastikas hanging on the columns and try to picture the Berlin Wall encasing it and try to picture Napoleon walking through. I mean, in Europe, you get so much of this. I remember when I visited the Palace of Versailles and you just stand there outside of Paris and it blows your mind. The people who have been there, the footsteps in which you are walking. The Treaty of Versailles was signed there that ended World War I in 1919, the official treaty that launched World War II, by the way. And it just blows your mind to think of the people who have walked there. It's really, really stunning. And so it will be when I stand at the gate again and I take a look around. And when I experience Berlin again, knowing a little bit more now of the history than I did the first couple times and having more time to experience it. You know, the first time I was there, it was just an afternoon that we had off. And so we went to the mall because I needed a carpet. We missed a lot of that stuff. And then the second time it was a mad dash after a gig down to see the gate and get some pizza. I didn't have time to really reflect. And I expect to do some of that this time. And to see some of the other cool stuff. There are really interesting walking tours of Berlin where I think they will take you to the gate and the Reichstag and the place where the Führer bunker was, the place where Hitler spent the last weeks of the war completely out of his mind, sending up orders to units that no longer existed in the German army, moving pieces around a board that just simply didn't exist. And where he eventually ended himself with Ava. I don't know if you can actually go into that. I don't know if it still exists, but they will take you to the spot where it was. And that's pretty sobering stuff, man. For a history person like me who is affected in that way, in that kind of visceral way by being in the places, it's going to be pretty intense. And I'm looking forward to it. And I don't know what solo travel is going to be like, but it's an important step. It's an important step in building my new solo life. And I'm stoked about it. And I want to say thank you to all the people who said, yeah, dude, go. Including my ex. Yeah, dude, go. Go experience this. YOLO and all that stuff. And so I have decided to do it. I am going to do it. I will be reporting at some point, I suppose. I don't know, from Berlin directly, but at least about it. And what's the point of this episode anyways? I don't know. Does there always have to be a point? I struggle with this a lot of the time. Can I not just talk about stuff? Sometimes the point is the mere distraction, you know? And these days, when so much of what you see online and what you hear online is so vitriolic and negative and frightening, I continue to read comments on things, and I really should be smarter about that because there's an asshole in every conversation. And it doesn't matter what you read, there's somebody who's just being a dick about it. And that gets really tiresome and it weighs me down a little bit. And so there isn't a great existential message or piece of philosophy in this episode, unless maybe you're going through a breakup where you realize that you're building a new life now and you can embrace that. You can embrace that or you can be shattered by that. Being shattered is actually probably pretty healthy if that's what you need to be for a little while. That's part of the process. That is part of grieving, healing, saying goodbye to an old life. You know, when you leave a job or when you separate from somebody, you are leaving a life behind. You are leaving an identity behind. You are leaving a way you thought it was going to be behind, and that can be something that you need to grieve. I spent a lot of last fall, particularly when I wasn't making the podcast, doing just that. And being a deer in the headlights and being disoriented and processing all of the feelings that come along with that. Even somebody as mild as me has intense emotions, man. But you come through the other side of that. It's not good to stay shattered. Be shattered if you need to be, but it's not good to stay shattered. Much like Berlin itself was shattered for a long time, but it came back, and they chose to rebuild that city, which was leveled during World War II. And they came back. And now it is what it is today, and I'm going to look at it. And so I guess if there's a message, it's that, hey, yeah, you can travel by yourself. And even if you're in a couple, it might be healthy to do so for both of you. Just to ground yourself, just to reconnect with yourself, just to have that little feeling of freedom. And you can bring that back into your relationship and be happy together. Maybe that's something to consider. And if you're single now, and if you're recently single, a solo trip can be kind of a pilgrimage back to yourself in a way. A way to get out of whatever circumstance you're in. You have to go as far as Berlin. You can go to the town next over, stay in a hotel for a couple of days. But exercise this sense of autonomy. Check in with yourself. Get out of your environment and into something new. Realize possibility. This trip for me is realizing possibility. It sucks when your relationship ends, for the most part. But maybe, it just opens up new possibilities, and a solo trip kind of makes you realize that in a way. And so I will be interested to know how this goes, and I will, of course, report back. It's not for a little bit yet. And that's all I got. That's all I have this week, and I hope it was in some way useful for you. And I don't know what else to say, except thank you ever so much for listening if you came this far. I do appreciate your support these 6 years. Go listen to the new Ghost stuff. The record drops, I think, on Friday. And good things happen when you put yourself out into the world, kids. So do that. Enjoy yourself. I will be back soon. Until then, I'll check you later. Yeah. Ich bin eine Berliner. That was Kennedy in 61. And some people say, since he used the word ein, ich bin ein Berliner, he actually said, I am a donut. Berliner is a type of pastry. I can't answer that. My Deutsch is not good enough. But aren't we all Berliners? And that was the point.